after all of the 2 snowstorms that canceled us out. So I'm glad that we're able to finally make this happen. First thing I want to do is thank the folks at Ogilvy and Game Theory for hosting us. So let's give them a thanks, please. So I know we're expecting a lot more people, so I don't know, maybe they're out celebrating in the good weather or something, and they're decided to bag the evening, but we'll see what happens. A couple of things for logistics. So we have got a couple speakers who are going to be dialing in online. We've got a couple folks who'll be here in person. Then we're going to do a couple of demos at the end. So we've got a really good speaker lineup here. We've got someone coming from the governor's office, or the mayor's office, who works with the open data, and Mitsue, but she's not here yet. And then we've got Cameron, Dick, and some folks from Enigma in the back. So thanks. We'll have them come up. We've got David Craker online, who's from the Census Bureau. He's going to tell us about all of the cool things that they do and all the data they have, which I was completely unaware of. It's actually pretty amazing what's out there and what the Census Bureau actually does, from at least what I thought that they did. And then we've got Jenny Richards from Tableau, who's going to give us some perspectives on what she thinks about open data and some of the issues that we might not be aware of or we should be thinking about when it comes to using open data. Just necessarily, download the data and you're cool to go. There's some things that we should all be thinking about. And then we've got David Milrod, who's going to do a demo, and Adam McCann. They're going to kind of show some things they've done with open data. So I think that's going to be real interesting for us to deal with. A couple of logistic things. We're just going to do Q&A after each speaker finishes because we have a mic that will run around, so we can't really do it in between. And just a little bit about the user group. How many people, this is the first time you're at one of the user groups? So pretty good number. Looks like about at least a third. So let me just tell you a little bit about what this is. So the intent of the user group is hopefully that you can leave with something, at least one thing you learned that you can use right away. That's always the goal that we have. And the format of the meeting always changes, and it really depends on kind of what's going on in the world of Tableau. There's David. And kind of what we think is important to talk about, and that always determines the way we run the meetings. So I say that because if you're here for the first time and you leave, I just didn't like the way that meeting went, give it another try because they're always changing different formats. So we've done everything from panels to real demos and deep dives and hackathons and so forth. The name of the user group is New Jersey and New York because we actually hold meetings in New York and New Jersey. So if you're one of those people that crosses the river and you want to go to the New Jersey one, if that's on your way home or you just want to go, that's good. You're definitely welcome to do that, so don't feel like you can only go to the one that's in New York. We have a lot of user groups coming up, so we've got one in 2 weeks in New Jersey at PSE&G. We've got one planned at the end of May at Prudential in Newark, then the week after that at the end of May or beginning of June, we're going to have one in Google down in Chelsea. Then we've got one in New Jersey at Celgene a couple weeks after that, and another one either in Jersey City or New York around the same time. So there's going to be a lot of stuff going on. Usually we don't have the good fortune of having 2 in a month, one in New Jersey, one in New York. When we have that happen, I try to do all the logistics around it. It can be quite a bit of work, but I think it's great when we can do that. So the punchline of that is we need hosts, right? If we don't have a host, we don't get to have a meeting. So if you think you might be interested in hosting at some point, not necessarily right away, just let me know, shoot me an email, talk to me sometime. Happy to tell you kind of what it takes to host a meeting. It's really not that much, to be honest. In terms of logistics for tonight, I think the restrooms are out kind of that way. When you're done, and I'll remind you of this, please clean up anything you've got so that the folks here don't have to clean up after us. We want to be good people about that. After the meeting, a lot of us, or some of us, will go out afterwards, just kind of socialize and hang out. This is a good chance to do that because sometimes we don't really have enough time here. There's a place, it's called Hellcat Annie's. It's about a 3-minute walk from here. So if you know where it is and you want to dash right out of here and get started, go ahead. If not, feel free to walk over with a group of us to do that. That's pretty much it for what I have to say as kind of a preamble. I am curious, did anybody try to solve the problem up here? What answer did you get? 38 is the correct answer. If you didn't get 38, just YouTube this, banana time image, and there are people who step through why it's 38. For people in visualization, it's really interesting to pick out some of the reasons why that ends up becoming the answer. So you can thank my wife for this one, because she texted me yesterday, and she's like, I don't know what to do with this one. So I had to sit down and still try to figure it out. All right. So let's get started here. So I think, Cameron, if you want to go first, I'll bring up your presentation. And I guess we got a duo.
Yeah.
So I don't want to just keep saying Cameron, because we have duo here. All right. So actually, let me just say one more thing here. Sorry. I want to just give you the background of how we ended up here, too, because actually it ties to the folks at Enigma. So I met Cameron, I think back in maybe November. You came to one of the user groups, and we got to talking, and he said, maybe we would like to host a meeting, or we want to talk about that. And so we got on the phone and started talking with some folks at his company, Enigma, and it was about maybe the early part of January, and it turns out that they do a lot of work with open data. And they actually make their work, even if they're doing it, hopefully I'm not saying this out of turn, work that they do with some of their customers, they actually end up turning that into data that's made open. And we started getting and thinking about it, and then they said, oh yeah, we're doing all this work for Open Data Week. It's coming up in March. And I said, what's that? So the plan of this was that it was going to be March 7th before all of the weather, which was right in the middle of Open Data Week. That was the initial idea behind this, is we were going to try to have this big meeting during Open Data Week. So that was kind of where it came from. So you can thank the folks at Enigma for kind of starting that idea off. And I think it's really interesting what's possible with open data. You're seeing it talked about a lot, but the idea that started gelling was that, what does that really mean? What is open data? Just this term that people throw around. And that's why we wanted to get this group of very different speakers together to give us their opinion, so that we could get kind of a diverse view of what maybe it really means and what we should be thinking about for open data. Okay, now I got that done. You guys can take it away. Thanks so much.
Okay, cool. Hi guys, just a little context. My name's India, and I work in product management for Enigma Public, which is one of our products at Enigma.
And I'm Cameron. I used Tableau a little bit in undergrad with open data sets and an environmental research group I used to work at. And so when I came to Enigma as a data engineer and front-end engineer, I wanted to use it as a tool to help to prototype some of the work that we end up doing with custom.
And also a minor note, our font has been just automatically generated as Arial, but yeah, Wackening is maybe not happy, but it's usually a little prettier than this. In any case, cool. So what is Enigma Public? Enigma Public is a community platform of public data, and it's a tool for discovery around public data. Okay, so we have the homepage has a series of curated data sets to talk about public data and use cases for it. And then in terms of discovery, we also have a pretty robust search facility in which you can search both metadata and also the data in data sets. And then once you get to the data set, there's an overview of what the data set means, and then there's additional metadata describing what the columns are. And then within our platform, you can also click this like quick summary statistics button, and you have a sense of like the frequency rank and the minimum and maximum of certain columns where it's applicable. And then within a data set, you also have the ability to search a specific entity if you want on a specific column and filter accordingly. Cool. So the agenda of this conversation today is we'll be talking about public data more generally, so not just public data as it relates to Enigma Public, how we get public data, how we make data more accessible, and then kind of more specific use cases around what we do and how we build off of the public data that we do have. Cool. So what is public data? Like a seemingly obvious question, and it is an obvious question with an obvious answer. So it's data in the public domain. And in an ideal world, public data is both accessible and understandable, but as someone who explicitly works with public data on a daily basis, this is like most certainly not the case. So a lot of times we'll have to, either purchase data or file a Freedom of Information Act, or the data is in like some super janky table on a PDF. And then we kind of have the business of getting that data and putting it into a system in which people can all use and explore the data. Right. As I said, data takes on a whole bunch of different forms. So I have spent a lot of time on the phone to government agencies and also writing Freedom of Information Acts. And then when we do get data, which is also like not necessarily a 100% chance with Freedom of Information Acts, a lot of the times they'll send it to us in really funky formats. So this is a CD. Sometimes we one time got a CD that only worked on like a very specific Windows computer. So sometimes it can really be kind of a mess. And then the final one is sometimes we also do web scrapes of data, web scrapes of sites that have data, and then also store it in Enigma Public. So in addition to that, a lot of the times when we do have access, or when we do access public data, there isn't necessarily a robust data dictionary, and actually most of the time there's not a data dictionary in the first place. So this is an example that we like to point out. This is data from the IRS Form 5500. They do seemingly supply us with a data dictionary, but as you can tell, it's a little lackluster. It's essentially literally just a column name on a form. So if you just do additional research, so this is actually instructions for the Form 5500, and we kind of just put it into our platform, so users don't have to go through this entire laborious process. And frankly, this is like a relatively straightforward process. A lot of the time, we kind of gather a lot of sources to put more context around the data that we do offer on public. So we have over 100,000 data sets, I want to say, on Enigma Public. Where are we getting it? How do we generate ideas? It can't just be, me and a few other people working on the product. And so we gather a lot of different ideas from different sources, one of which is employees. So a lot of people who are at Enigma, if they're not necessarily directly working with the platform, are passionate about public data. And so they'll, have ideas kind of left and right on the Slack channels, or they'll send me an email, or someone will something exciting and go, ooh, India, put it in public. And then in terms of client data requests, we might do a POC for someone, and they'll say, hey, I'm interested in like building permits in Canada, and we'll go ahead and do that scope. And generally speaking, those kinds of data sets might end up in public. And then, of course, our user community. So we have a public support email, and people will send us emails in regards to potential data set ideas, or even just like topics of data set ideas they might have, and we kind of go out with that. And then in terms of the open data community, kind of like keeping a pulse on what open data advocacy groups are saying, or other kinds of open data portals, or even like open data newsletters, just kind of generally keeping a pulse of what people are saying, topics around that.
Great. So for this next section, I'd like to talk a little bit about what people can do with these open data sets once they have them. Because the challenge usually isn't, a big part of the challenge is getting your data set into a CSV, right? But then people want to figure out, like, what is the purpose of having this data set? So we have a sub-site called Enigma Labs. Go to our website /labs. And this is the first of the most recent of the projects, and it's our sanctions tracker. So there's a government agency called OFAC, which publishes multiple times a day entities that the U.S. government has issued sanctions against. And so those entities may be companies, they may be people, they could be entire geographic regions. And you can see on a daily basis what new sanctions have been issued and what is the nature of those sanctions. There's also an email notification. So for the sort of business angle on this is that you're legally not supposed to interact with parties that have sanctions applied against them. And so this kind of hints at some of the science work that we do. And we've also done some map visualizations with our friends at Cardo around showing where these sanctions occur, or where the parties that are being sanctioned exist. So another one of these projects that I'm pretty excited about is the healthcare data project. So how many people are familiar with the drug development process? Yes. Well, more than I thought. But before I came in, I didn't know anything about it. So basically, when drugs are developed, there's a lot of testing that happens, and adverse events related to those tests go to lots of different agencies. Some may go to the FDA, some may go to the World Health Organization, some go to lots of other different international bodies. All told, we identified 10 different public data sets, which all see different pieces of the drug development process. And we built a analytics tool that resolves or basically combines related drugs into one row, basically, and normalizes all the schema or aligns all the shapes of all the 10 different public data sets so that they can be interacted with in a nice visual UI. And all these things, by the way, are free, and you can check them out on our site. But the last open data project I want to talk about is the smoke signals project. This was actually a collaboration between the city of New Orleans and the Red Cross. And so the challenge here was that fire departments, like many local government agencies, have limited resources, and they want to help figure out where they should be pushing to people install smoke alarms to minimize deaths from fires that go undetected. The problem is that their data set is incomplete, right? They have fire incident data for part of the city, but not for other parts of the city. So together with Enigma's data science team, they built a model which used census data, variables in the census data, and associated them with the fire incidence data, and made it so that you could use census data to sort of predict what is the likelihood of fires happening in parts of their geography where they didn't have fire incidence data. And we've gotten feedback from them that it has been helpful in helping to avoid deaths related to detecting fires. And so this tool was also set up in such a way, since fire incidence data is protected in many different geographies, so that anyone, if they put their data in the right shape, could upload it to the portal and then build the model for their jurisdiction, even if they hadn't interacted with us ever before. So hopefully that got you thinking a little bit about what can be done with some of these open data sets, but we're the Tableau user group, and so we'd like to use Tableau to do it instead of various front-end technologies. So recently, we added a Enigma Public Tableau Connector. So you just got to do two things. One is sign up for a free account, and also agree to use the data for non-commercial. But that aside, once you pick the data set that you're interested in, you just go to the data set in the UI. You pick out the URL, which is in the top corner, and you put that into the Web Data Connector modal that pops up in the Enigma, in the Tableau public interface. And then the nice thing is that every time this data set updates on our side, you can just click refresh inside Tableau Web Data Connector, and you can have sort of live updating visualizations for government agencies which otherwise may not have an API to interact with their data sets. And this just shows that modal. And so we had a colleague who has never used Tableau before, just sort of started clicking around, and about within an hour later, he had plotted the New York City liquor licenses, active liquor licenses, which is updated basically every week in New York State. So that could be a cool data set to check out. So that's it from us. There's the link to Enigma Public if you want to check out our free tool out. Again, we have over 100,000 data sets in this tool. And we also have a data newsletter that we think some of you might be interested in called Between Two Rows, which is you can also find on Enigma Public. Lastly, if working on open data sounds interesting, view, especially the challenge of how to automatically link these different data sets together, or how to productize that sounds interesting to you, we have a lot of open positions. So thanks, guys.
Questions? Oh. Hold on, David.
Tell a little bit more about your model, because obviously it's not solely a public good. There's also, I guess, some subscriptions that might factor in. Could you just give a little introduction to that?
Sure. Okay. So usually the challenge is not just getting one data set, right? It's figuring out how to take the data sets and relate them to one another, and then to remove duplicate rows and the data integration, basically, right? So we have clients who have private data sets, which if they were linked with public data sets, they'd be enriched, right? You have addresses. You'd like to know how many fires have happened within a 5-mile radius of that. How many restaurants have failed health inspections related to this particular issue in that radius. So I would say that we build technologies that are around linking public data sets with internal data sets, especially in the areas of financial compliance and pharmacovigilance, but always looking to extend that. I would say those are two.
First thought I had was, this is pretty incredible that all that's out there, and that until we met, I'd never heard of the company. And I'm just curious to go in and see everything that's there. And the fact that you actually have a Tableau connector is great. We'll definitely work to publicize that some more. How in the world do you apply for something through the Freedom of Information Act? It sounds daunting, but it was intriguing to hear about, again, it goes to that process about open data, how you said, sure, I can get it, but then what am I actually receiving, and how do I turn it into something that's useful is not a minor effort.
Yeah, it really varies department by department. So usually you have to write a letter in some cases, and in a lot of cases you have to mail the letter, and it's just exchanging handwritten letters essentially. There's kind of an art to it. It's you have to kind of explain if you're willing to pay for it, in what format you want it, and I always ask for in mission readable format and with like metadata and data dictionary. And then it's kind of sometimes it's back and forth. Sometimes they'll say they have it, but they won't give us some information, and they will give us others, and sometimes they'll just outright reject you. The New York, like most departments when I FOIA for in New York City, they're really responsive, and there is a lot of back and forth, but in a lot of cases, kind of just leave it at that. Yeah, but it's useful if you can, a lot of journalists will actually FOIA for information, so it's very useful if you can kind of like point to a recent article, say, you've already given this data out, you've kind of already made the effort, give it to us as well.
Is this data centered about specific industries or areas, or how is it grouped?
Yeah, so the way in which we nest our data initially was based by department, so you kind of had to know that your data was, I don't know, like in the U.S. federal government, and then kind of work your way down in a tree. But we've recently reintroduced tags, so you can kind of search by topic. So if you're like, oh, I'm interested in health data, it's just on the left side, inspector, on the site, and you can kind of click it and see what we have in that realm. In terms of data that we're especially rich in, we have a lot of company data and a lot of like building data in particular. And we also do an element of curation on the homepage, so we kind of break it down in terms of data that might recently have been used like a news article or data that we have FOIA'd for, or data that's especially big for someone who might be like a data scientist looking to build a project. But to say that we organize it in a variety of different ways. Mm-hmm.
All right, I think that's good. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. So the other thing that came up that they mentioned quickly was the PDF. And I'm assuming that folks know this, but in one of the recent Tableau updates, they put in a PDF interpreter. Do people know about that? Yeah, so it might be something interesting to play around with. I've used it a lot because when I start doing things for any of my Tableau Public ideas, I've usually come across PDFs, and before it was a little bit difficult to manage them, but it's definitely worth experimenting with. If you haven't, it's definitely not, I would say, as robust as you might hope it would be. It's definitely for it to intelligently get data out of PDFs is pretty complicated. So it's actually pretty impressive what it's able to do on some pretty crazy PDFs that I've put through it. So if you've come across PDFs that you think you might use, you could definitely throw them into that and give it a shot and see what comes out. So our next speaker is from the mayor's office, Mitsue Iwata, and again, we can thank Enigma, because when we started this whole conversation about the Open Data Week, I asked them, well, who do you know over there? Because I have no clue how to start talking to the mayor's office. So we've actually started to connect with a few folks in there now. And again, this is one of those rich sources of information that maybe you've started to look at. And for those of you who've been with the user group for a while, a few years back, we actually did a hackathon with some of the data from there, which was on the restaurant inspections. Now, going through that data maybe didn't give us the best feeling about what's really going on in the world of restaurants. But it was pretty interesting to understand exactly what was there. And again, that's the whole thing about data, right? You all have your assumptions, and I just remember one of the pieces from that, even if you get an A rating, an A in school is like, oh, that's perfect. Well, guess what? An A in that world means really good, but it doesn't mean perfect. So you can go, research that for yourselves. But I think it just points to the idea about getting access to all this other data that's out there in our world. Especially, a lot of us, I think, get so focused on our internal data that we work with, right, day to day. And sometimes I think just breaking out as a practitioner, using Tableau, having that as an application at our disposal, and being able to use that other data kind of opens up your thinking. So if you haven't done that, I really encourage you to go out and just find some data that might be in an area that's of personal interest to you, and just start playing around with it, because I think it might give you some ideas about things that you could probably use back at work, where we get kind of contained sometimes about what we're able to do just because of what our requirements are in the day-to-day environment. So let me get Mitsue's presentation here. So the only thing you'll have to do is just kind of scroll down. I put it into a PDF. Cool. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Hi, everybody. My name is Mitsue Iwata. I'm project manager at the Mayor's Office of Data Analytics. Thank you for hosting this event. This is a really nice space. I wasn't expecting this. And thank you also for hosting, as this was originally part of Open Data Week, which was earlier in March, and there were all these snowstorms that came up, and even after rescheduling it came up, so I'm glad it's finally here happening. Just as a disclaimer too, I'd like to say that I'm sort of speaking about our office, but also everything is from my experiences. I don't speak on behalf of the entire city or all of the mayor's offices, and Just putting that out there. So I'm going to just talk a little bit about our office and really how open data plays a role in strategy, in our office's strategy and operations. And then I'm happy to answer any questions you guys may have afterwards. So we're the New York City Mayor's Office of Data Analytics. We were established by executive order in 2013, which makes us about 5 years old, a relatively new and young office under the Bloomberg administration. Our mission is actionable insight for New York City government. The tactical engagements and strategic engagements really around delivering more efficient and effective services around the city, as well as our office is really charged with bringing the culture of data to various agencies and departments. I think that's what we try to focus and try to develop. And part of what we do with that, or how we do that, is really led by with open data. So our open data program is something that we manage jointly with the Department of Information Technology and Telecommunications, DOIT. And we have, New York City is unique from other cities or municipalities' open data programs in that it's legally mandated, it's a law. Like agencies have to comply to our open data law, which really gives us a lot of teeth, right? So and over the past few years, a lot of the legislation, or there have been amendments to the law to make it even more robust than it was before, which is pretty fantastic. So through that, we have 2,000 data assets on our open data portal. We have about 20,000 page views a week. And like I said, earlier this month when we had Open Data Week, that was really our opportunity, or that was how we celebrate open data. Raise awareness around open data, not only internally to our city and agency partners, but also to the public and everybody else, to demonstrate the value of open data and how it can and does impact a lot of the city. So in 2015, and so this is the link, you can even go to the Contact Us page, which that brings you to a site that has the form, and you can ask any questions to us. You have links with the data. A lot of resources are available through this landing page. So open data is an invitation for anyone, anywhere, anytime to engage with New York City. In 2015, we put out a report on open data, and that's where we sort of pivoted from open data in just putting up tables on a portal to being more engaging with our community partners. I think it's one thing to say that open data is open data because it's up on a portal and you can access it. But what we really want to do is we want to reach all of New York City, and we want to reach every resident as much as we can, in the sense that not everybody can work with a table, not everybody knows how to do joins, not everybody is familiar with Tableau or all these other visualization tools. So from here, we really pivoted more towards user engagement, and we started with understanding who our users were, because we didn't know. And so we've done a lot of research, and there are even reports that are available on that open data landing site that shows the groups of people that we see are engaging with open data, whether they're academics, people at school, people in community-based organizations that are using the data, or people that are using the building civic apps and tools, and even startups that are using our open data for their products. So again, open data is really, it's a national and even an international movement, right? It's beyond just the open data portal that's available. It's become this whole culture, and this is what we've also espoused or also taken on as our office's philosophy behind the work that we do. Open data has been able to bring us this sort of citywide reach, so that we get, as the Mayor's Office of Data Analytics, we get to communicate with every department and every agency in the city to work with them on their data and to identify what data that they have that should be publicly available, and even enabling them to publish that on the open data portal. It underlies a lot of our data sharing and analytics practices. A lot of the analytics projects that we work on usually use open data because it is such a rich resource that we have. Better data quality and data governance standards as well. On the open data portal, the Contact Us page that I mentioned, that's a way for you to be able to tell us if something's wrong. If you put the data up on a graph and you see that like there's a trend going up, and then it like drops down for 5 days and then it goes back up, something probably broke there. And so you should tell us. And the only way that we'll know, I mean, we monitor and audit, but really the only way that we know it's being used and the only way that we know to keep it up and maintain it is from engaging with the people that use it. Has sped for tech and innovation, the Enigma folks that use it, I'm sure, and I'm very happy about that. And then it's also conduit for crowdsourcing public expertise on data. Again, schools that have research institutes or other think tanks that know about housing or they know about transportation can use the data and really show us the value that's there as well. And again, a tool for learning. It's used in a lot of different curriculums from high school and up, other training as well. And also just to touch on our analytics work. As an office too, we take on open data as how we approach analytics, in that we want to be open and as transparent as possible in the work that we do. So we published our project library. You can go to the bit.ly ModaLib site, and it takes you to 3 projects that we've written up in a very plain English, like easy to understand text, so that it isn't all just code and graphs and only for people that know how to do joins, but it's also for people that want to learn about what is an analytics process, what does it look like, and how have we been able to implement some of these tools in our operations and in our work with agency partners. That, I thank you again for inviting us to speak, and if you have any questions, you feel free to email me. This is my work email, and also a few links that will take you to any of our online resources.
How big is your team?
We are small but mighty. There are 5 of us. So as myself as project manager, we have 2 data scientists, an advisor, and a director of civic engagement and strategy. Adrienne, who is our director of civic engagement and strategy, she does a lot of the work around open data outreach, not only with the agencies, and each agency has an open data coordinator, so that's like our point person within the agency to be able to liaise with whomever else is in that agency and all the data. And so she's developed like a professional network almost across all of the agencies through that open data coordinator program, and then also partners with folks in the community and a lot of the open data advocates around the city and all the other sort of companies and teams that are interested in open data. But we're small but growing. We're also hiring if anybody's ready, so let me know.
I use the open data a lot at my job, and I'm wondering if you have any data sets that might be like hidden gems that we're not necessarily aware of or looking at. What's your favorite?
So we recently did, it was an internal meeting with one of the databases and data sets that are available on open data. It's the Citywide Street Centerline data set, CSCL. And CSCL is actually, it's another executive order that was put in place to create a database of address points, like authoritative address points. And it was developed and created because of a lot of emergency response. So before CSCL existed, the fire department, I guess somebody would have like a 911 call, they would say, go to this address, and instead of the fire department going to that address in Staten Island and then the police department going to that address up in the Bronx, there's now this authoritative data set. And so that's available on the open data portal, and I guess it's more like a geographic database, but it also has links to like the type of street, whether it's a state street or like a highway or like a one-way street and the directionality of it. So you can get some interesting visualizations from that, I think. Check it out.
Have any awareness of how unique or common this is for other cities and of various sizes? Have you looked around to see what else is going on around the country and the world?
Yeah, I think so. Again, open data has really grown a lot, and the past 10 years or so. A lot of other cities do have open data portals, and even we have New York State has an open data portal that has like state level stuff. Even like Boston, New Orleans, San Francisco, there are a lot of other cities that do have open data portals. But again, I think what distinguishes New York City is that it's a local law. So agencies, when we talk to them about what data sets they have that can be made public, they are required to by law. So we also work a lot with their legal team, right, to make sure that the data set that they are going to be publishing it won't cause any risk to the agency, and that it isn't personally identifiable information or anything like that. I think, and again, this is just my opinion, but with other cities, it's more of a policy or a program, and so you might get that pushback from the agency partners to say, hey, this is open data. We are publishing now to Open Data Portal, and it's going to be great because everybody can see your data, they can use your data, they can make it better. But it's kind of like an opt-in program, and so we have that extra stick if we need to use it.
I was curious whether you really need to approach the government or the city agency first, or they come saying, we have these data sets and we want to figure out.
Sure, that's a good question. It's usually a combination. It's like all of the above. Again, the local law passed in 2012, but over the years there have been amendments to it in that there's even this kind of an audit process. It's called evaluation and verification. So we go to the agencies and we do this sort of evaluation of the data sets that you have already on open data and the data sets that may be publishable on open data. And so that's sort of a chance for the agency to push to do a review of what they have and to be able to set up a timeline to publish it. We also have, and there's also part of that legislation is also like an external, a way to get input from users and from city folks to ask like, what data sets do you want to see? Do you want to see data sets on food vendors? Do you want to see data sets on rat inspections? It's already up there, but there's also a way to engage the bigger community around publishing to the Open Data Portal too. And then you'll even have people that are internal to the city that are like working on a project, and they're like, I know such and such agency has this data and it should be published, but, and so we'll even get those kind of like hints and work with them to publish the data sets.
How's it going? Do you have any data on school districts and schools within districts? Want to analyze public schools by district?
So there is Department of Education does publish a lot of data on schools and their performance. I would have to look into whether or not there's probably a district map, but I can't say for sure. I don't know the data well enough myself.
I have a question. Yeah. So one thing I'd like to propose. We talked. This is semi-staged. Is I know you're not speaking or making a commitment, but I'd like to propose that you look into adding a format that's called hyper format that's specific to Tableau, so that when we come in, start using the data sets, not just here, but there's a lot of people that are using Tableau, obviously. That format's right there, and it's going to be the optimal way for them to kind of get your data, download it, and start working with it right away. So I'm sure I can talk to you in Tableau about that, but just want to throw it out there.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea, and the features that are available now are limiting in some ways, and so we're always thinking of other ways that we can make the data more accessible sometimes.
Yeah, so that's just a proposal. But one thing I'm curious about is this. So what have you seen as the most popular data set, and do you have any interesting story about what was done with it?
So we just recently have been, like I said, we've just recently sort of figuring out who our users are of open data, because before that we just published it and said, done. but now we want to know who's using it and how it's being used. I think there's this email that has which bunch of the popular ones this week, but I didn't look at it closely. The Department of Building Jobs filing, so looking at permits for constructions or any sort of changes or demolitions, I think that data set is pretty popular. The Taxi and Limousine Commission, they also publish their the status of any sort of taxi application, and so a lot of folks go and look at that data set to see what the status of their applications are. But I think there's still this gap of understanding how it's used that we're trying to better understand. We have a contest where anybody who uses open data in some sort of fun app or project, they can submit it through this contest, and then we'll publish it on our website as like, here are the top 5 or top 10 ways that open data is being used in the city. And so if anybody, that's also available on the open data landing. I think you get a letter of recognition from the mayor.
Oh, there's incentive.
Yeah. You put that on a resume. I think that's pretty good. Yes, I think the question was with geospatial data. Yes, some of the data sets, so we have over 2,000 data assets. But data assets is a sort of a general term because we do have tabular data, so it's in CSV or spreadsheet form, and then some of them are shape files. So you'll have like borough districts, PD districts, sanitation districts that are also available on the site. And I think school districts, but I'm not.
Okay, I think we're good. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you again.
I'm already feeling overwhelmed hearing about, all the volume of open data that's out there. And then we're going to hear from the Census Bureau next, which is probably just going to completely blow the doors off of all of this. Just to kind of follow up on that last question about the geospatial data, I think that's a really interesting area, again, to play around with, because Tableau, again, recently has been enabling a lot of geospatial capabilities beyond just what we've all been used to before, which is the kind of core mapping. So they've been able to now connect to different geospatial files. First, it was more about land masses. Then they added in more of kind of the line, being able to follow lines and patterns at street level kinds of things. So I think a lot of us at work don't have that, or it's this open data stuff that we can use and blend in with things that we might be doing at work that wouldn't readily be available, or that maybe you'd have to pay for it or something, right? So I think it's opening up kind of a whole new world. And if you haven't looked at it yet, you should get on the beta for what now is called Tableau 2018.1. Because what they're doing is they're going to allow you to combine your own latitude and longitude information with Tableau's built-in latitude and longitude information, which has been a real sore spot. I know even for me, I've always wanted to do that, and you have to kind of find a lot of workarounds. So if you're playing around with a lot of data in that space, it's definitely something you should check out if you didn't know about it, because it's really a great enhancement that's coming from the mapping world. Awesome. Just a point, not to put anybody on the spot. So what I'm going to do is also ask the speakers. I'll send them an invite. If the speakers can join our New York, New Jersey community, so that if folks have follow-up questions, that we can get a conversation going online as well. So I'll send you all links for that, and if you wouldn't mind getting on and being available once in a while to just check it and see if there's questions that are coming in, because I think this is an area that I think is really ripe for the future, and hopefully we can do more with it in the user groups coming up. So, David, hopefully you're out there and we can hear you.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Oh, good.
Fantastic.
Okay.
So I'm going to switch over to yours, and I'm going to be David's operator here. So just to give you a quick sense of how I kind of got tied up with the Census Bureau, and then I'll let David introduce himself and some more. So as one of these, again, just like Enigma and the mayor's office, it was kind of a serendipity at the end of, it actually happened really fast. It was right at the end of February. I was actually at a Tableau public sector meeting, and some of David's colleagues were presenting, and I immediately got the sense like, oh wait, we're having this open data user group in a couple of weeks. It'd be great if you guys could come and talk. And so that's how this came about, and kind of got a quick learning path about the Census Bureau. And the big thing that hit me that I just completely didn't know, and David will get in a lot more detail, is, I hear Census Bureau, and right, it's census.gov. I always think about just the census, but it's amazing what that organization is actually responsible for when it comes to working with data, collecting data, researching data. It's really been eye-opening. So I think you're going to learn a lot to hear what David, what he does, what his colleagues do, and what's really available to us is pretty astounding. So David, I'm going to let you take it over, and you just tell me when to move to the next page.
Okay, so Lee, I can just go ahead like this, right? I don't need to have my face on the camera or anything like that. Is that correct? Yeah. Okay. You can hear me, right, Lee?
Yeah.
Okay. So let me go ahead. All right. So we're on just the first slide here. Just to let you know that what we do at the Census Bureau, that all the data we put up there is free. You don't have to pay for it or anything like that. And that also what I do, and I have another colleague who lives in Yonkers, we come out and we train people how to get that data. And, we'll even do it multiple times if you use it one time and then you forget and you need to come out, or we'll do a little bit of follow-up with you over the phone and help you get that. That is a free service. We come out in the evenings, we go to whoever needs it, and we will do a workshop for them and show them how to get our data. So just so you have that in mind when we're going through this. So if you can go on to slide 2. Okay, so probably you think of the Census Bureau, like Lee said, as an agency that goes out once every 10 years, and we count the total population, and certainly that is what we do. But probably our agency has the wrong name, because we're actually, for the most part, the Bureau of Statistics. We're getting demographic and housing statistics, and also these other things that are up on the screen: American Housing Survey, Housing Vacancy Survey. These are all other sort of surveys that we do, and we are a contractor to other federal agencies as well. So we contract to HUD, to City of New York, to Department of Labor, Department of Justice, to a lot for the CDC. So we go out there and we have a lot of employees, and we knock on doors, we visit hospitals, we visit businesses, and we gather those statistics, or I'll call them raw data, and then we turn them over to these other agencies, and they do with those statistics what they need to do. The last thing here, though, the American Community Survey listed there, is our very own survey, and I'll get into that in just a minute. So Lee, if you could just go on to the next, number 3. Okay, so you know that we have data from a decennial census. That's what we call it in-house, a decennial. That's really a hard count. We go out there, we ask some very basic questions. We do it once every 10 years. We ask it of every housing unit that we have in our database. It is the official count, and we release that data down to what we call a block level, much like a city block. However, we don't, just so we know what's going on here with the current situation in Washington, we don't release those numbers down to a house level or a personal level. It's just a general number for the block. So it will be in sort of an average, or I won't say an average, just a number for the block. So how many males are in the block, how many females are in the block, how many people over 18 years of old, how many under 18 years of old. But we don't actually release any names or house numbers or anything like that. So that is once every 10 years. So Lee, if you'll go on to the next. However, what we do all the time is this American Community Survey. And so the American Community Survey is, I think, what some people think of what we do, but they don't realize we don't call it the census. We call it the American Community Survey. We separate it out from the census. We are out there every month of every year for the Northeast. As an example, New Jersey, New York, New England. We start out with about 22,000 cases a month. We finish up with about 18,000 a month that we complete, and that is a sample. We do 1 in 10 households over 10 years, but about 18,000 addresses a month for the Northeast, and it's sort of we asked 72 questions. We asked 48 questions about the people in the household. We asked 24 about the household itself, what sort of energy they use, how many cars they have, how old the house is, that sort of thing. So I call that deep characteristics, things you can't really see on the surface. And then we release that information in all sorts of tables, and we release it in different ways, but we release it down to a tract level. And I just want us to be clear here, when we see that information, sometimes it will be in numbers, and at other times it will be percentages, like the percentage of the total number of housing units in this tract, for example, that are more than 50 years old, or that sort of thing. So we do release that out. I have to say that personally, even though we do use the word data, I tend to think of data as something that's very raw, that we're pulling in, and then we're actually sort of putting that data through what I call a hopper, and it goes out as statistics, okay? And so I usually say we pull in data, but we release it as statistics, okay? So that you can't really identify anybody, but you can identify a trend in an area. So Lee, if you could go on to the next slide. Okay. So we just need to think a little bit about sampling if we're looking at that data, and I won't show you how to get the data today, but maybe you already do know, but let's just think about this. We can't go to every household in the American Community Survey, so we're actually sampling, and we have 2 types of data here. We have what we call ACS 5-year data, and that's an average of data we've collected or ingested over 5 years. And then after the 5th year, we release that data. And we do this every year. It is sort of a rolling stock, and you can go and get 5-year data for 2015 or 2014, 2013. You just need to realize that there's an overlap of the years that we've pulled in data. So we do that for areas that are population 4,000 to 65,000. So those areas might include census tracts or counties or places or towns in New York State. In New Jersey, it could be townships as well. ZIGTA means zip code tabulation area. We do have that information as well. We also have school districts in there. So that is in there. If an area is lower than 4,000 people in population, I tend to caution people to look at what we call an MOE, margin of error. That margin of error gets higher and higher if there are less people in the area who responded to the survey. For areas that are over 65,000 people, that's a really good number of people for us to release data. We can release data every year. So, for example, we have community board areas in New York City. Almost all of them are over 65,000 people in area. So we can release that data every year. They can get updated data. and it was only collected over 1 year. So we have here large cities, counties, congressional districts, PUMAs. Those areas are all, you can get the data every year for just what was collected the last year. So Lee, if you could go on to the next. Okay, so I just really wanted you to see a few of the tables and what would be in there. And by the way, over on the left and through all these, I've sort of put pictures of brochures and pamphlets that we send out to people, and sort of little freebie things that we give out, like this data wheel. But a lot of it is we use to try to talk to people in other languages to gather the data. And I just want, when you think of data collection, the Census Bureau is very impartial when they're collecting data. So we don't stand in a mall and say, okay, that person looks friendly, this person looks friendly, or let me just get the first 3 people that walk in the door. It's actually a scientific algorithm that selects addresses, and we go to those addresses, and we really are intent on getting the interview from that address. And so anyway, that is the way that we deal with it. This is one table, the DPO2, means a data profile. It has a lot of deep social characteristics in there. I just wanted you to know that each one of these is a heading, and then within those headings, within tables, you can get even more information as it drills it down by age and sex and things of that sort. And just so we're clear on this, and I know it's been in the headlines the last couple weeks, notice halfway down it says citizenship status. That question has been part of the ACS for decades, as far as I know. We just sort of ask, are you citizen or not a citizen? We don't say, are you, it's not a question about legality or illegality. It's just, are you a citizen or not? If you are a citizen, when did you become a citizen? That information is in there, but once again, you can't identify anybody. It's released as a statistic for an area and nothing more than that. So Lee, could you go on to the next slide? Okay, so this one, just so you know, these are economic characteristics that you can get. And once again, each one of these is just a heading for other sub-tables, and you can go in there and you can look for information and sort of pull out what you need. Okay, and Lee, the next slide. Yeah. Okay, and then once again, housing characteristics. We do have a lot of information in there about this. I don't think many people know that we ask questions of pertaining to housing. And quite interestingly, just so you know, if we go out there and an address is selected, and we go to that address and we discover that nobody is living there right now, maybe they've gone abroad for a long trip, or maybe they're in Florida all winter, we still go to the neighbors and we interview the housing unit. So we try to find out all the information we can about the housing unit, even if nobody is living in there, and we still add that information into our database, and then finally into our statistics. So Lee, if you would go on to the next. Okay, so just to really quick, I know that we have Tableau for many people as sort of geographic or mapping sort of software, I'll call it. And I just want you to know my background is actually cartography and GIS, so I'm sort of sensitive to this sort of thing. So I just want you to understand that how we look at things, or how we categorize things at the Census Bureau. If you're looking for data certain ways, we start out with this down in the right-hand corner. There's a little red block. Once every 10 years, we do sort of an inventory, and we go around and we find all the blocks in the country, and we do renumber them once every 10 years. And then those blocks make up block groups. Sometimes you can get data down to a block group level. Depends on how intense the population is. But generally, the block groups then make up a census tract. Census tracts are actually, we would call it maybe our showcase geography. We try to publicize that and get people to use data at a census tract level. It's a lot like a neighborhood, but they're very stable. We don't change census tract boundaries for anyone, really. And you can go back through time and you could look at census tract information and see how things have changed. So census tracts fit nice and snugly within a county, but not necessarily within anything else, not necessarily within a city or a zip code or anything else, but they do fit within counties. The counties fit within the states, and the states within the U.S. So that said, if you look over on the left, we do have all these other geographies. These are just a few of them: the ZGTA, the place, minor civil division, congressional district, even school districts, and there's a lot of other things that we have, but they may not fit nice and snugly for every census tract. So we just need to be aware of that when we're looking at the data. And this is really my last slide, but I do want to say that when I come out and I show people how to get data from our website, and I walk people through it and show them what's going on, there is a component in there for you to create maps in our website if you want to, and I sort of show people how to use that. And then there's also a component where you can download, I know the generalized word is a shapefile. So I'll call it a shapefile for lack of a better terminology, but they are sort of cut and trimmed to water boundaries. So you can get that out of American Fact Finder, and it marries up really nicely with our data if you need to get that. But anyway, so that's what we have at the Census Bureau. Lee, if you want to just go on to the end slide there. Yeah, so just so if you need my email, but I certainly will subscribe to the invitation that you're going to send out to us. This is really an interesting topic for me. So anyway, that's my quick overview of what we do at the Census Bureau and what we have for the public. So if you have any questions, let me know now. I have to leave pretty soon for another meeting, but I don't know, Lee, I don't know how well I can hear the question. So.
I'll start, see if you can
hear
me.
Yeah, I can hear you.
I've got two, actually one's for Mitsue. So
okay.
The work that they're doing for New York City, this is kind of a joke question. The work that they're doing for New York City, that's going to be open data?
The vacancy report, right? Yes. It will. We'll put it on our list.
It was funny to see that up there. But David, you said something that sounded kind of a bit ominous, so I'm curious what it means. You said that when you send out the surveys, it said you're intent on getting an interview from the address.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah, I know. What we do is we send out the survey. People they get it in the mail, and they can respond to it in paper, or they can respond to it online, okay? And if they don't do it within a certain amount of time, we're going to send somebody to their house. And that person doesn't want to take no for an answer. So they'll do whatever they can do I shouldn't say it like that, but they're going to do it in a very rather pleasant way to get the information. It doesn't always work, but they will certainly try. Unfortunately, the people who are employed in the field, their job depends on a lot of their job. They have to have a certain percentage of interviews that they get, so they're pretty intent on getting those interviews. So just, please help them out. Yeah. And also, I need to say, if you go to a block group or something and you suddenly see that there's no data there, well, that's because somebody didn't answer the interview. So think about that, if you get one of these surveys, if you don't answer it, it's possible that in the future you need information for that area and you're going to get less than robust information, or with a higher margin of error, I should say, if you don't answer the survey. So.
I just got one more question. That's interesting to hear.
Yeah.
One more thing. Just how big is the Census Bureau? It just sounds tremendous.
Okay, so I got to think about this. I can't speak for the whole Census Bureau, but I can speak for the Northeast. I think we have around 1,200 field representatives who are out there all the time doing these surveys. So there are 1,200 for right now doing American Community Survey and these other surveys. But how big is it when we ramp up? We will start doing that over the next year for the 2020 census. It will just swell up. So it will just be huge.
Wow. That's a lot of people out there.
Yeah.
Cool. Other folks? We got one up here.
Hey, how's it going, David? Do you guys impute any data?
Yes, there is a little bit that's imputed. I don't know which ones they are, but yes, I do know that they do sometimes impute some of the data. And I also want to point out that some data, I should have said this before, if we get a block or even an area and it seems somebody answers a survey, but it seems like they're the only ones who answered the survey in their block or their block group or whatever, we don't want to put that data out there thinking, I'm going to say that they can be identified. And so we may flip their information over into an adjoining block just to sort of protect the individuals that live in that area.
Right, I think we've got our questions from the floor. David, thanks so much for calling in. I know you've got a really busy day today, so really appreciate it. Hopefully we'll see you in person at one of these.
Okay, all right, and I'm going to sign off right now. So.
Great, thanks.
Okay, thank you very much, Lee. All right, good night.
Yep. So I guessed right about that. There's just an enormous amount of information out there, and obviously he just scratched the surface of what they do. You heard, I mean, the key of what he said is they're contracted by other agencies to do the research. So just think about what's going on and how much information they're probably processing. I mean, who knows how much of it we actually get to access. I guess we can put in one of those Freedom of Information Acts, right? The kind of a whole cycle of this stuff that we're learning about here. All right, Jenny, I'm going to pass this over to you. I'll just do a quick chat here. So as we were kind of forming the agenda of speakers, I thought that it would be really good to have someone from Tableau weigh in on how they think about open data and what it means from a couple perspectives. One, of course, is I'm sure everybody knows about Tableau Public, right? So that's a huge venue, not necessarily about open data itself, but how people are using data of different sorts. And my guess is a lot of that is open data that people have gotten somehow and published. So it's a huge venue for at least showcasing work that people have done. And so I ended up talking to Jenny about this, and she's got, besides having worked on Tableau Public, she's in a little bit of a different role right now, but I think she can bring some interesting perspective. And I talked to her about this idea of what are some of the things we need to think about when we're using open data, right? It's what does open really mean, and what goes with that we should be considering. Sure, if we're playing around with it and we're downloading something and doing it on Tableau Public or what have you, personal blogs, fine, right? But what happens when we really start to rely on that information if it's something that we want to use at work, right? Or we're making critical decisions about something and blending it maybe with other information that we have for our own companies. And so she's definitely got some thoughts about that as well. So Jenny, I'm going to hand it over to you. Let's make sure we can hear you.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? Great.
Yep.
Wow, I cannot hear myself, but that's okay. Can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay. So, hello, everybody. We've heard a lot about open data in the last hour or so, and I've actually revised my presentation like 3 times as things have come up, because I think that there's some stuff that, now that I've been doing this for a couple of years, that I have only really started to think about. And I've spent the last 1.5 to 2 years working on the Tableau Public team. And by all accounts, everything you do on Tableau Public should be open data. And sometimes, you know, most of the time that's true. But I have seen a couple of things that are on, you know, that are published, whether or not they're on Tableau Public or on somebody's blog, that make me start to kind of question some of what we're doing, not about the product, but some of the things that we're doing with the data. And really, it comes down to data is really only as good as the collection methods, and who collects the data, how it's collected, and what it represents. So I'm not an expert in this. I will say outright that I'm coming to this very much as somebody who's trying to learn a little bit more about this space, because it's developing really very quickly. But I do want to throw something up on screen and ask, and Lee, you're going to have to be a proxy for me. How many people have seen, come on, let's go forward. Next. How many people have actually seen this test in the New York Times? Lee, anybody in the room?
I think we have 0 hands. Okay,
so I will send this link out afterwards, but I'm going to just leave it up there as I'm kind of talking through this. I teach Tableau to university students, and you know, we spend a lot of time analyzing open data and visualizing open data and telling stories with open data, but only after I've worked with this for a little while did I start to wonder about some of the stories that we were telling. And what this puzzle is actually an example of a test for bias. And I'm sure, you know, you've had a lot of people that, you know, bias comes in all the time, but I want to give you just a couple of other things that you may not realize. Any idea of what these words are? And it's really hard for me to do interactive when I can't see you and can't hear you. These are actually a few examples of cognitive bias. So I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, because if you take a look at this next slide, there are like 200, 300 different kinds of cognitive bias. Now, for all of you who've taken statistics courses or research methods courses, you know, some of this may be old hat, but I don't have that background. I simply spend my day working in data. And it was only after I started to kind of scratch the surface of some of the data that I was working with that I realized that the more data that I worked with that was about people, more population data, and a lot of it, you know, census data, that's kind of an exception, but a lot of people data is subject to the biases of the people who are collecting the data or the population that it's about. So suddenly, open data didn't quite seem as good as I thought it was. It is definitely good data, but I have to now stop and think about how is it collected, how is it used, who did the collection, what was their methodology, and what kinds of questions did they ask. So it's kind of one of those things that you start to get in the practice of the more you look at open data as it's about populations. So, you know, open data, when it's about financial information, may be a little bit easier to track down the source of the numbers. But anytime you're asking questions about an individual or about a group of people, you know that it's impossible to generalize in a way that doesn't become a stereotype. So something to kind of pay attention to with open data. There is another thing that is a little bit new in the sort of open data field, and I will bring it up on screen now. Can anybody tell me what this is? I can't really hear you, so Lee, any guesses?
Hippocratic oath is what people are saying.
Right, it's the Hippocratic Oath. So there is a really pretty nascent movement in the sort of data science community to design a Hippocratic Oath for data. And it is something that a lot of data scientists are talking about and data practitioners are talking about to first do no harm with the data. And, you know, there's a guy up on Capitol Hill testifying this week about a company that did a little bit of harm, possibly, with some data. And so that has come up a lot in the last couple of months. But I would encourage you to take a look at a couple of sites, and I will send links to these afterwards. There is an organization called datapractices.org, and it is a group of data scientists that are coming up with a signature document to sort of for people can think about their use of data. And I say this about data in general, but open data in particular, because it's free and it's out there, and we all have access to it. And the last thing we want to do is necessarily make a mess of a story that is, you know, we have totally good intentions, but we maybe misrepresent data, or we aren't necessarily sure of how the data arrived, or you know, what kind of decisions or stories we're telling about the data. I would kind of encourage you to think about the sort of ethical challenges of using some of the open data. The last tiny piece I want to add is that I have a little bit of personal experience with this. Last year, we had, if you all remember, a really big hurricane in Houston, and there was a great Tableau Public visualization that was created based on some 911 call data. And I think 911 in Houston had been putting call data out in a Google Sheet, and somebody from the Tableau Public community did a fantastic visualization showing the location of every person that needed rescuing in in Houston at the time. It was updated in Google Sheets, so it was fairly real time. The viz got a lot of, it got a lot of people involved in actually helping rescue people. But there were some other considerations that maybe I was a little concerned about. Well, what happens to this data afterwards, and what happens to the privacy information, and is there a segment of the population that we're not seeing in this data set because this is self-selected? Anybody who has access to call 911 is shown on this sheet, but what about people who cannot get to 911 or are unable to access help in some other way? Is there something that we're not seeing in this data set, and something that we need to consider? So that was how I actually started my journey into thinking about the sort of ethical challenges of the data. And as I was doing research, I realized that there's a lot of people out there starting to ask these sorts of questions. And I ran into a friend of mine who happens to teach data ethics in emergency response, which I thought, well, this is fantastic. And so I asked her if she would, just talk to me and explain to me sort of how, as a data analyst and a data communicator, I should be thinking about these scenarios when I have a set of data that might be about hurricane response, or any sort of disaster response, anything that involves death, destruction, and people, right? How do I respond to this because I don't want to look at the data as just a number. Every point in the spreadsheet is a person. So what do I do? How do I ethically behave to this data, and how do I represent it so that I'm not exploiting the data and that I'm doing the right thing? And I decided to take what she taught me and share it with everybody else. So I am in the process of doing finalizing my editing of my own podcast. So this is not meant to be a plug, but I'm trying to share this information with other people because I think that all we need is really a little bit of exposure to some of the situations that we may not realize have ethical impact. I'll talk about things like emergency, response and healthcare and a couple of other sections, but really it's designed for people like me who are scratching the surface with open data. I'm really getting to know some of the stories. I'm getting to know the people, but I'm not a subject matter expert in any of these areas, and I'm certainly not a statistician, and I'm not an ethicist. But how can I represent the data in a way that is fair and equitable and ethical? And so I'm going to try to share what I learn with the rest of the community as we go. So that's really all I kind of wanted to show you guys today, was just kind of think about things like bias and ethics when you look at data that comes from the community, because every single piece of data represents an individual, and they are more than just a point on a map. So, any questions that I can answer now that I've scared you to death?
I've got a couple.
Okay.
First one is kind of more of a thought that you talked about the ethical issues, and you see how fast information travels today. So people could take, kind of extending things you were saying, you could take some data, twist it around however you want, and if it kind of catches on, that's going to get around very, very quickly and start pushing people's perceptions in certain directions, right? And they can quote that information from being from a reputable source,
right?
But they put their own spin on it very easily. So, do you have any thoughts about that? I just hitting me as you were talking about it.
No, it's a very real thing, and I'm not sure that there's a good approach to it. I know that I started this presentation as me at Tableau, but I hope that you all saw that really it's me as a data practitioner and a storyteller, because really this affects all of us. It doesn't really matter who you work for or what you're talking about. Data escapes our hands really, really very quickly. I can't say that everybody's going to sign on and necessarily behave in an ethical way. All I can really do is sleep well at night and know that I've done the best that I can with the information that I have, and encourage other people around me to do the best that they can with the data that they have access to. But I'm not going to be able to control everything that's out there. So you have hit on something that does keep me up at night, but I don't think that anything that I said today is going to really make a dent in that, except for myself.
So who's published something on Tableau Public? So we've got a handful of people here, maybe 10% of folks. So again, we talked about that before. And is there anything you can mention that maybe, again, now that you've raised this kind of these issues or concepts, does Tableau have any efforts around this idea of ethical use of data as it continues to promote Tableau Public, right? So
right.
How does that kind of mix together?
Not yet. It's something that I'm working on internally here to bring some visibility to it. We have, a lot of interest in talking about data literacy, which is sort of what you need before you can talk about data ethics. And we know that a lot of our community doesn't necessarily have, or a lot of the community we haven't talked to doesn't necessarily have a good foundation of what does it mean to be data literate. So before we launch into, that more nuanced conversation of, the ethical use of data, can we start with a foundation of, this is how you are a literate data user. But I think it's something that, I hope that it's something that we continue to work with. I know it's something that I will continue to do here as long as I work for Tableau. I also know that Tableau Public is a really special space, and people are allowed to publish pretty much anything they want to Tableau Public. We do have, the terms of use and the sort of community behavior where you don't take credit for work that's not yours. We ask people to use open data only, but there are thousands and thousands of visualizations that are published every day. And one of the best aspects of Tableau Public is that you can download somebody else's visualization to learn how they built it, which is awesome if you're just kind of getting started. The challenge, though, that we've seen is that in doing that, a lot of people will republish somebody else's viz as their own, just not even realizing that, they've accidentally made a copy or a triplicate or, 30 or 40 copies of one person's amazing viz. And so it's kind of a scale issue. Behaving well in public, we've never really never been really the sheriff of that town, because I think it's meant to be a really open space for learning. But as we work a little bit more with data literacy and hopefully data ethics, I think that you'll see also some of the community leaders, the ambassadors and the Zen masters and other our featured authors, those people that are doing great work within the community and kind of leading by example, will continue to kind of move into that space. That's about all I can say that's happening really with public.
Thanks for sharing that. I think it'd be an interesting topic for Tableau conference to have sessions on this.
I do too. I think it's kind of a scary topic. That's me personally speaking, not me as a Tableau employee. I think it's a scary topic for a lot of people because it's very hard to be black and white about this one. So I think that it's a space that we're going to need to continue to work in and kind of understand what are the boundaries as contributors and as a company that we will kind of move forward together as. So yeah, it's something that I talk about personally a bit, and hopefully one day it'll be a conference topic.
So maybe we can get David's team, not on now, maybe we can get his team to add some questions to their all the surveys and research they're doing to get people's opinions about open data or something.
Mm-hmm.
If it's the fact that you're saying it's a scary topic just reinforces that it should be discussed, right? And
right.
Especially again in our community, it's if we're the ones who are responsible. We're the ones who are doing the work.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, for us to understand, make sure that we're, because I don't know what being ethical. I mean, I have my own ideas about what it means, but someone's writing codes of standards and things like that, and who knows what the implications are for the things we might just be doing innocently.
And I think that there's always good intention behind most of the decisions that we make. I mean, I refuse to believe that people are just born bad in their decision making. But if you want a real good look at kind of intentions gone awry, if any of the room has not read Weapons of Math Destruction by Cathy O'Neill, you should. because it's not about Tableau and it's not about visualization. It's about decision-making algorithms, how they've sort of changed the way that we look at things like incarceration and education and poverty, and how things that were designed to be simple, time-saving programs have changed sort of the face of those very big societal issues. And thinking about that when you look at your data, the things that you may do to represent individuals in a in a map is fundamentally important. I'll leave one nugget for the room, and this is maybe old hat, but if it comes up every single class that I teach, when we visualize census data, and I know the people that presented at that at the Gov Summit back in February. Those are good friends of mine with the census. Whenever we visualize census data, inevitably there's somebody in one of my classes that will always put people, will actually put the color of the circle on the map to match the race of the person. And it's a sort of, well, maybe not like that. But I want to make sure that I encourage students to sort of think about the decisions they make when they talk about color selection when they're visualizing something. But now I have tied their color selection to race and to ethnicity and sometimes to gender and choice. And suddenly what was a relatively straightforward design decision becomes a fraught conversation. And for a lot of people, it's just simple. It's just put a color on the map and not really think about it. But I'm pretty sure that when you paint your room, when you're having a baby, you paint the room, you're really, really thoughtful about the color that you put on the wall because you maybe don't want to reinforce some behaviors or others. You think about those things. Those are the same kinds of things that I'm thinking about when I'm teaching people how to visualize population data on a map. So just kind of one thing to think about is the color of your dots on your map when they tie to people or gender. Don't do the easy thing, because the easy thing is probably reinforcing a stereotype. Probably goes without saying, but people do it every day because it's easy.
Well, that's a great point. I'll just kind of close out this. I actually have a client. We were talking about some of these things the other day about how they want to represent male and female, because it's the same a lot of information. We got into this big discussion because a lot of what they'd done is they'd used all the typical stuff. The man and the woman, pink and the blue, all that. But what came out when we talked to some other people that they work with, they said, we actually only want to use words because, one, those issues about reinforcing, but it's very much in the public eye today about the sensitivity about these kinds of things where it's beyond male and female how people want to describe themselves today. There's lots of different ways that that's happening, and so you can't even assign a shape or a color or anything like that anymore. So they're just literally just using a series of words, however people want to relate that way. So kind of that idea again about how you just fall into these reinforcements, and we have to kind of figure out ways to break out of them. And again, the more visually we reinforce that, again, as the folks here who are doing that, the harder it is to break those patterns. It's kind of the same thing about just think about how hard it is at work to stop using red and green.
Right.
Kind of thing that we're still fighting that battle, let alone think about changing these things that are also even more culturally embedded, not just kind of work related. So I think that's a great point. All right, so any other questions for Jenny, or otherwise we're going to let her go, and we'll get on to some of the demos that we've got set up for the rest of the evening. All right, Jenny, thanks so much again for dialing in, and we'll post some of the links you send, and we'll post up your presentation as well.
And feel free to reach out to me. Anybody who's out there, they have questions, I'm always open.
All right, thanks again.
All right, night.